This is our first online interview. We like to call it the COVID edition, where we'll be looking at some of the issues that are of concern to the Tri-Cities. We like to explore and analyze issues of current concern. So I'd also like to acknowledge that the interview today is taking place at Evergreen Cultural Centre in Coquitlam, and so we are on the unceded Coast Salish territories. I'd also like to express our gratitude to Tri-Cities Community Television for recording these sessions and allowing us to reach a broader audience. So today we've invited Port Moody Mayor Rob Vagramov to join us to chat a little bit about some of the environmental initiatives that Port Moody has undertaken and some of the ones that they propose to undertake. And in addition to that, we'll be looking at how Port Moody Mayor and Council work together to ensure a respectful workplace and an open democracy at City Hall, and to ensure that all elected representatives' voices are heard. So we'd like to welcome Mayor Rob Vagramov today to join us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks,
Good to see
Rob.
you guys.
It's great to see you here. We just want to acknowledge that you'll notice that Brad and I are not wearing face masks. We are in the midst of the COVID pandemic, and Mayor Vagramov has his mask on. And the reason for that is that our social bubbles have expanded a little bit recently, and Brad and I are in the same social bubble, so we're not wearing our masks.
But we demanded Rob wear his because we don't know where he's been.
That's right.
Stay a couple extra feet away here.
That's
there
right.
You go.
And Mayor Vagramov we're distancing, keeping our social distance for our 2 meters to ensure that everybody's safe and sound here. I was wondering, before we get going on some of the environmental initiatives in Port Moody, could you give us just a little bit of a sense of how the COVID crisis has affected day-to-day operations at City Hall and how you're managing some of those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an absolute turmoil for a number of months, as you could imagine. You know, those first few weeks, the first month really of the COVID crisis really threw, I would say, all of local government into a bit of a frenzy. You know, we have a body of staff that need to do their work. Some of that work is legislatively required. We need to get on with the public's business. We've got pressing matters, and then of course private matters to deal with, like development and other functions that folks are entitled to. And at the same time, we've got a global pandemic. So how do you square those two? And it really was a number of weeks of really intense work by our staff body, our executive management team, and a whole host of city staff. And they were working around the clock to try to figure out a way that we can completely rethink the way that a city hall does business, and to do it yesterday. And that's something that has been sort of talked about, you know, work at home, flexible hours, these sort of, you know, high-level concepts have always been talked about. But now when push came to shove, it happened, and it had to have happened. And so now we have kind of this hybrid model where we have folks coming into the office, folks working from home. And then of course the broader community has sort of really come together around a couple of initiatives around COVID, and it's really great to see that.
It's a steep learning curve for sure. And I think, can you address how, do you feel that the COVID crisis and going online and things like that have affected transparency in any way, or are you still able to keep transparency with city council meetings and things like that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, transparency is one of those things that, you know, there's nothing more transparent than sitting down in front of folks and actually talking in front of them or talking to them. So obviously by removing your elected representatives, putting them, you know, in front of cameras, changes the dynamic quite a bit. You know, we had a couple rough spots here and there on Zoom, as I'm sure some of you guys saw in the news there. But overall, yeah, I think we did pretty good. Now we're transitioning back into in-person meetings. So we just had our first return to a mitigated meeting. We were all physically distanced. We had these big, they looked kind of like the Pope Mobile with the big plexiglass
Or
and all
if you're
that.
from my era, it would be the cone of silence from Get Smart.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. So it's really weird at first, and it takes a little bit of extra, attention to make sure folks can be heard through all of those.
Yeah.
But I'm really excited that we're back in person. We are holding our breath for wave 2. Public health keeps telling us we've never had a pandemic without a wave 2, and so we're always open to going back to Zoom if we unfortunately have to in the fall.
This is a really interesting time in how it was so sudden, and it seems like governments did not have a specific plan in place at the municipal level. But now it looks like this could be something that happens a little bit more often, from what I understand,
Well, emergency preparedness, it's one of those things that you don't realize how little of a plan you have until it's time to act. And you can have the best plan, you could spend hours and weeks and years, as we do. Like, we have these drills. We were actually having our senior leadership team there was actually having a drill specifically around emergency operations center and how to operate in these sort of disasters. And that was, I believe, the week that COVID sort of really hit in the Tri-Cities.
and the shutdown began.
Exactly. And so our staff were ready to get in there with an emergency operations center. So that was almost ready to go. In fact, it had already been dusted off the week before. But again, the specific scenario, who would have thought that it's going to be a virus, right?
Do you
Right.
see anything not changing back? Like, are there changes that, due to COVID, that will be permanent going forward?
It's really hard to tell. I would say that first off, I hope that people will stick to washing their hands and stuff like that. Like, I've been a germaphobe in the best of times, so this has been a bit of a nightmare, walking around and having people potentially have a deadly virus for which there is no cure. But of course, and I'm speaking as somebody who's privileged just by virtue of my age, right? So like that's a huge concern for a variety of age groups. You have deaths in all of them, but of course it really, the amount that this will impact society, I hope that there are some positive permanent changes out of this, and I bet we'll see some ones that we're not all too excited about. I can't imagine getting on a flight without a mask, maybe for, I don't know, a decade. I don't know how long this is gonna be.
How many years have we had to check our shoes?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
so-
So it's one of those things that once a security protocol gets put into society,
Yeah.
we have this knack of ramping up. And so that might be here to stay, or at least temperature checks. That's a good one, because
Yeah.
you hear people sneezing on flights even before COVID, and
There's nothing worse than sitting
Yeah.
next to somebody who's
yeah, you're
for
about to
8
get
hours
sick.
who's,
Yeah.
that's true.
And because of that circulated air, I've gotten sick on a plane before, like got on what I thought was healthy, and by the end of it, I'm really feeling under the weather, and that's a difficult thing. You mentioned something just a moment ago about how in airports, masks are going to be, they could go on for years. Masks in general right now are contentious with some people. What's your feelings about that? What do you think how we should be thinking? Now, having said this, we're a little tiny bit older than you. Not much, but a little bit older than you.
Yeah.
And as you said, it doesn't affect all ages, but how do you think we should be speaking to our younger generation with regards to that, respecting people and things like that? Because there is a difference.
Well, I mean, and the way I'm looking at the way that this is panning out, young people have a huge role to play in this because of our, we have the ability to go out there and be in a lower risk group, just fundamentally lower risk. So I think that there's a huge role to play there for any kind of operations where there are a lack of available workforce, for example. The higher risk pools, I think this is, there's a call out there in any disaster for folks to be responding, and I think that the younger you are, the more eager you should be to be serving your community in any way that you can, to be out there and doing whatever you can to help.
Online, online and in our regular life, I see more and more, it just feels this way. I don't know that this is an actual thing,
Sure.
but it feels like there's that distrust of authority, and there's this like, I can do whatever I want.
Well, we see that less here. Like that is a very American thing, right? Like I have a family in Sacramento. My partner's from Sacramento. We have, that culture is very ingrained in the U.S. where authorities automatically distrust it. In Canada, we're a little bit different. Sometimes I personally think that we're a little bit too obedient in Canada. I think that even myself, but in these situations where there's a pandemic that requires a coordinated response and people to put this on when you're on the train, and I mean, it's not that big of a deal. Just put it on and get over it. The arguments that you hear online are depressing. It's depressing to hear grown people get up at public input in, Orange County or somewhere in Florida and saying, well, I don't trust the mass. I'm going to be using God's greatest.
My breath, my choice.
Exactly. God's perfect respiration system. And it's just like, what are you even talking about? People say, well, I don't want to breathe in my own CO2. It's like, folks, this at most will add a centimeter to the length of your breathing tubes. Like, I think people need to get over it.
Right. That's all right.
Are there any last words on COVID before we move on?
I mean, there's the last words I think are going to happen maybe 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 or 5 years from now. I really hope that I really hope that we are able to get out of this in a way that minimizes loss, both human life, economic, and to a certain extent our freedoms as well, right? Like that's a real concern, and I really hope that we're able to pull through and get out of this as a community.
Sure. All right. Okay, if there are 1,000 more, I got 1,000 more questions.
For COVID stuff, for Port Moody, portmoody.ca/COVID-19, that's all the updated, the facility closures and all that, so just a plug for our website.
And I'm sure that the other communities in the Tri-Cities will have very similar stuff. So it's a good place, a good centralized place
Of course.
for people to go within their own communities. But I also peruse it because you're from a different community than I am. I've been looking at your website and I'm seeing that there's such a great crossover of information in those places, and it's a really good idea to check that kind of data, that kind of information within your community. So I think at this point, what we should do is move on to what we actually had you here for, which is more environmental issues and things that are going on an environmental front. Originally, our biggest interest was the plastic bag ban that was going on Port Moody. From an environmentalist side, that was quite an exciting thing because it's this move away from plastic, which seems to be so hard to get through people's heads, that there are alternatives. That there are really sustainable alternatives and actions that we can take as individuals.
And easy alternatives.
And easy alternatives. So we were excited to hear that, but from what I understand now, that's been put on hold for a while. And maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that.
Well, this has been an issue. I mean, it's been talked about for decades. Plastics have been around since the 50s, and looking back at some of those cartoons from the 50s where it's like the wonders of hydrocarbons, and it shows like the chemicals coming out of the oil barrel and forming into toothbrushes and all that.
It's a very useful substance.
Oh, it's a dream, right? Back then, especially if you don't have them. And then obviously we sort of learned the flip side of that is that the landfills and the oceans, and turns out that it's not that compatible with life as we know it. So I was really excited when this issue was coming up, and it came up for us in the Youth Focus Committee of all places. So we have a committee system in Port Moody. I'm sure all the Tri-Cities have their own committees. We have a Youth Focus Committee, and
so you're being responsive to youth?
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, anybody who's willing to join us as a youth, please join, because this is,
What a
That's
concept.
great
What a concept.
shout-out. Yes, no,
Let's
that's
leave a future for the
amazing.
kids.
yeah, it's
Wow,
not a bad
there's an
idea,
idea.
right? Yeah, there might be some people coming down the line.
After us.
It would be a lot of fun to talk
We
to
should
them
care about them?
sometime.
Yeah,
I'm a
exactly.
boomer. What?
He said it. No, I think that there's, and all of the pros and cons and debate and all that stuff, it's intergenerational. And that's the thing that, that's really eye-opening, like to pull away from the stereotypes and realize how many people of all ages care about all of these various issues. And for me, seeing the Youth Focus Committee take this on and say plastic bags are a big one. And of course, plastic bags are the poster child for plastics in general and single-use plastic. No one's really talking about the lids on their own. People are talking about plastic bags because you have the heartbreaking imagery coming from the oceans, right? So it was fantastic to see that passed as a motion at the Youth Focus Committee. Comes to council, we have a discussion about it, and it ends up passing at council, and we end up pushing it up to the Lower Mainland Local Government Association, which is like a giant city council meeting. That ends up passing, and so we end up forwarding that issue up to the Union of British Columbia Municipalities, which is like an even gianter city council meeting. And so eventually this gets passed up from one Youth Focus Committee member. Their voice on paper gets passed up to the feds in the province. It's not the first time plastics were discussed, right? Obviously. But to me and to the folks who were involved in the Youth Focus Committee, it was really inspiring to see that kind of access through the official channels to get up there and to
It's
get on the...
hugely validating for youth to see that their voice can actually be amplified and carried right up
Yeah.
to the highest levels, to make some changes.
Absolutely. Politics can work. It's just, it takes, in my view, this is the way that I always put it to folks, is that to do something good in politics takes an inordinate amount of energy compared to doing something that's bad in politics. And
Or
of
the
course,
status quo.
the status quo is easy, tax breaks are easy. You talk about deregulation, you talk about the good old Harper years, easy. You go from 6 million protected rivers and water streams, you go to basically zero. It doesn't matter how many because it's so much lower. Easy. And this is one of the things that drives me on these environmental issues, is to see that kind of access, see what can get accomplished permanently rather than temporarily.
So I understand that Victoria had done the same not the same process with the youth necessarily, but had put through a proposal for a plastic bag ban.
Right.
And they ended up getting challenged by the Canadian Plastic Bag Association, saying that the city had overstepped their bounds and that they actually didn't have jurisdiction over regulating the environment. And it was held by the court. That
Right.
decision was held up. So do you see that being an issue, or do you see that being an issue for other environmental type initiatives that you'd like to pass?
Now, I don't want to say anything specifically about the good people at the Canadian Plastics Association,
Yes.
because they're very good people and I fully respect their line of work.
Yes.
But generally speaking, I think money has one of the worst eroding effects on any kind of environmental issue.
The interference of money.
Oh yeah, the influence, the access that it buys, being on the inside of just the local level and just being able to sort of peek in. As an immigrant, my family fled the Soviet Union. I got all of the stories about communism and corruption and how that all worked. And being able to sort of look behind the scenes and seeing stuff that, it's not out and out corruption, but there are things that happen that make me feel uncomfortable, and that make me feel very depressed when I look at the bigger picture and I see, well, as a kid, I would go like, how is this even possible that let's say one industry or a number of industries can come together and get, such a huge sweet deal on some kind of thing, whatever the issue of the day is. And now I know. It's money, and the money buys you a big voice. So on that front, I think that coming back to the plastic bag issue specifically, I think that we have to respect what the courts say, obviously, and if the courts say that we don't have the jurisdiction, then we have to find other ways of trying to either influence that decision at the provincial level or do what we can locally, regionally to get the desired outcome, which is to not have single-use plastics or have dramatically less of them in our systems.
So that's kind of like the way that's our way to overcome this impediment, is start trying to find local ways that we can do it, and reaching out to, say, the people who are making the purchase of these plastic bags, the businesses. How is your relationship with them over this issue?
It gets contentious at times. We get folks reaching out, and especially during COVID, that's yet another reason why this initiative is getting delayed a little bit. This time it's a little bit understandable because you've got folks, mom and pop shops, that are really struggling out there. To lay a cost on top of them at this critical juncture, when we have uncooperative landlords, folks who are not interested in taking that 25 or 20% cut on the federal programs or the provincial programs for rent support. You have, in our community, we've seen an exodus of mom and pop shops out of Moody Centre when we changed our official community plan and inflated the land values as a result of that. Taxes go up, your triple leases
Everything's
get
connected.
affected. Absolutely. And so then you see sort of this exodus and it's a terrible legacy to leave behind. So I think that overall, when we're looking at the plastic bag issue specifically, like you say, you got to sometimes go find alternative ways of getting things done. And again, it's like you have a door, it's easy to go through, but somebody locked that door, and now you got to hike around town. It's much harder, it's a huge impediment, but again, as long as there's people fighting for it, then I think
And I
we're
guess part of that can come from the community too, people taking initiative themselves to use reusable bags once I know in our local store, we're allowed to now package our own if we bring our own bag.
For sure. Well, and another piece of this I'll throw in there is you have businesses that have legitimate concerns, right? Like if you're in a situation like COVID, even outside of COVID, right? Mom and pop shops, they're not on a level playing field with the corporate brands that are in our communities. I like an A&W burger as much as the next guy. Try to cut down on the red meat, obviously, but the local businesses, in my view, are what are the places that need support from senior levels of government. So for example, if you have a situation where there's a certain, quarter of a cent difference between one kind of lid and another kind of lid, what is that cost going to be? Is it in the public's interest? Obviously, it's in the public's interest to phase it out. Why don't we have a jobs program for that? Why don't we have a subsidy program for that? We have a $30-40 billion subsidy program for some of the dirtiest industries in our country. Where is the subsidy program to transition? Where's the subsidy program for plastic bag?
And of course,
changes?
this comes from another two levels of government above municipal governments in order to put those in place.
Well, I mean, this is something that hasn't really been discussed locally. I'm sure it'll get brought up. But at the end of the day, the taxation tools that local government has are, how could I put it, very unprogressive, right? Like you have a piece of property and you're taxed on that property. Your property goes up in value, you get taxed more than the next guy. It's not a redistributive, it's not conducive to redistribution, which is what a lot of these issues boil down to.
Yeah. On the other hand, though, another approach I would like to think that businesses could consider is that this is just really good optics for them.
Oh, yeah.
To be leaders on this environmental front. And we have seen, I mean, if you follow the news and you follow some of the threads on the internet, we're starting to see that there is a big divestment from oil, and these changes are beginning to happen. It would be very positive and very appreciative of businesses to be leaders on this front.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime you go into a coffee shop or you go into a place to get some kind of smoothie or something, and you get one of those the plastic straws, that are, you know, super wide and full of that plastic, you're kind of like, okay, great, more of the same old.
Huge opportunity here.
But you get those ones with the paper straw, and it's kind of like, oh, cool, these guys are doing that. And you remember that, folks come back. And
They market 100% Canadian beef. Why not market 100% recyclable materials in our packaging?
totally,
Buy our stuff.
absolutely.
Help us make this. So that's good. I think that
That's great, thank you.
that explains that.
That's
We should
really-
probably go into any of the other initiatives that you might want to tell us
Oh, yeah,
about.
I mean, I brought a whole list. These are, you know, this,
So Nancy and I will go now, and you just read to the camera for a few
Well,
minutes.
looking at.
okay, I gotta, where should I start here? No, I mean, this council, specifically this term, has been so active on the environmental file. And I'm so proud of the work that's being done. First and foremost, one of the initiatives I'm most proud of is the movement to unify Bird Flynn Park. And that is one that has been near and dear to my heart. I grew up in that part of Port Moody. It's a gorgeous park for folks who don't know. It's a 355-ish acre park with formerly a 22-acre strip dedicated to a roadway. And it was supposed to be suburbs, and councils of the past had the incredible foresight to turn that into parkland. And so now you get to walk around some of the second growth forests and be in a place that doesn't feel like you're right in Metro Vancouver.
Yeah, it's a beautiful area. And once you
Incredible.
fracture it, once you put a roadway through there too, you totally change
Oh,
that.
totally. And it's, especially from listening to professional environmentalists, to scientists, to some of these voices who have been around the community who have championed this issue for a very long time. It does change the feel of a park. It obviously changes the functioning of an ecosystem. And I know that the ecosystem side of things is a little bit hard for some folks to understand because it's quite a complex system. But this is one of the biggest changes in land use, I think, that this part of Metro Vancouver has seen in a very long time. Back in the past, there was a plan to put a bridge over to Deep Cove and then push a road up to Squamish. This was one of the theories at the provincial level back in the day. And could you imagine how much crappier the Tri-Cities would be if there was a major connector to go up through here, through the forest and up into Whistler? It would have completely changed the nature of the Tri-Cities. And I'm glad that was sort of shelved for a while. And I'm really proud that we were able to formally get rid of that in our plans to say the spread of humanity ends here. And it doesn't go an inch further. It doesn't matter if it's the whole thing turning into suburbs. Doesn't matter if it's a small sliver for a narrow mitigated road. No, it's closed.
It's really refreshing to hear sort of a stronger stand on that. That's something that's very near and dear to our hearts as well. So it's nice to know that there's a little bit of pushback there.
I'm sitting here thinking all the devil's
I know.
advocate things to say.
We're trying to constrain ourselves.
But what about the condos that could be built?
No, actually, no. So on that front, I really appreciate that idea because I am, and I was sitting here thinking, how will you take this when I ask you this? I am a proponent for going up rather than out. I know that living in condos and living in buildings is difficult, but as a species, I think that we have a responsibility to all other species, and we have to, at one point, do what you said, put an end to it. But that means us figuring out how to go up.
Yeah.
And when I say that, I'm not talking about the little tiny boxes that they stuff people in now. I would like us to go up to a reasonable height, not towers everywhere, but a reasonable height with apartments large enough for families to live in and
Finding
be brought
that
up with.
balance between density
And building
space.
building green spaces around those buildings so that people can have a mixture of both.
For sure.
And still be and something that I saw on your website earlier this week is that building communities that people can walk in
Yeah,
to get all their, I think you say your goal is 90%
yeah, absolutely.
of everything somebody needs to live their lives, they can walk to.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which would be fantastic. That's, I think that's the good design that we can create into our communities that create sustainability for our species on this planet with a much greater host of diversity.
Well, one thing that I found really interesting when I was kind of perusing your website was the sustainability report card for developments. I'd never seen anything like that with so many different boxes to sort of tick off and make sure that you've covered all the bases. There's culture and arts and environmental, economic, like the whole sort of spectrum is there.
Absolutely, and it's helpful at the council table because we could look at that and have sort of a dashboard view of some of these areas.
Is that an
Now,
initiative under your?
This was at the, I think this was the last council, actually, the previous. It was either the previous council or one before that. You know, that's an area that is a fantastic start. I think there are some tweaks that should probably be made to some of those. Every so often we get one that has a high score on something and we're like, how did that happen? And we look at the bullet points, it's like, okay, well.
Do you think
some
you
of
were
that
on
stuff-
council when that was done?
I'd have to look back and check. It was either my first term or the term preceding.
So you would have a memory about how a community would go about creating something like that? Because that sounds awesome.
Yeah, no,
right?
that's something that any,
To find the balance.
any council can do. Any council
Right.
could do that. We're under the Local Government Act. We're not under our own special charter, so that is something any local government in BC can do. If you're interested in that, reach out to your councillors, reach out to your mayors and see if that's something they'd put on the table.
It's an interesting approach, I think.
Yeah.
I guess, can we talk a little bit about how you maintain a respectful
Working
workplace?
we're working with your government.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's something else that we wanted to talk about,
Yes.
is how governments work together. Because, you know, we're watching governments in the Tri-City, and at various times we see flare-ups where it's difficult for people to work with
No way.
to each other. Yeah,
Here?
yeah, no, we've seen that.
No way.
Just
Yeah,
on
a
the
couple
rare
times.
occasion.
Yeah, yeah. And
And
the public, we hate it.
Yeah,
We hate it.
yeah,
We
yeah.
want your lives to be absolutely lovely.
well, that's a nice sentiment. I think on the issue of working together, you know, a saying that I like to throw around every so often, behind every cynic there's a disappointed idealist. And that's something that I find myself in quite often. Maybe it's because of my Ukrainian heritage, maybe it's because I got involved in politics at a young age, but respectful discourse and dialogue is something that I don't really have hope for in this country or in any Western democracy anymore. And it's something that I had aspired to for a while, something I still try to uphold as best I can. But at the end of the day, when we get to, you know, you can have policies for organizations. In fact, we have a code of conduct for our council. And I think every member of our council can probably point to every single one of us at some point breaking that code of conduct, including myself. And it's really difficult to put your foot down when you don't want to humiliate the person that you work with and say, listen, that thing that you said, I want you to apologize for
Publicly.
that. Publicly. Because I don't have that in me. Like, I don't have a desire to put somebody on the hot seat and say, you better apologize to whoever for
Well, I
what you said.
noticed that your code of conduct has both an informal and a formal process, so a lot of those types of issues could potentially be dealt with in-house.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't go public. There's a number of mechanisms that you have and things
Yeah,
there.
we do. Yeah, it's
I
not
guess
really.
One of the things, how do you ensure, or can you even ensure, that an appropriate sort of action is taken or an appropriate reaction is taken?
I don't think that you can. You know, one of my biggest concerns when the code of conduct was being introduced was that it could be weaponized, because everything can be weaponized. If you have somebody who's willing to turn something into a weapon, you think of something as incredible as the invention of flight. And there's some maniac somewhere who thought, well, what if we can set people on fire from here? This would be really great. And next thing you know, you have a warplane. Any invention can be weaponized if you have a willing person. And so that is a concern that I had in the past. I've had issues in the past where some formal processes were used against me in the last term. I would say very sort of nonchalantly, sort of undeservedly. And, you know, there's there's always that risk of having those kind of policies abused. And I'm happy to say that we haven't had that this term. But we, you know, in Port Moody at the City Hall, and I speak for myself when I say this, I have found it to be an incredibly hostile work environment ever since I got elected. And people don't talk to each other, people, you know, exclude each other, people have disagreements, and they sort of, I think there's many cases that I could point to on even in council meetings where I get left with the impression that that person was trying to hear that person the wrong way on purpose, so that you could create a little whatever, and we don't, it's tough when you get to that political level. It's easy in an organization to say, okay, here's your code of conduct, you won't say this, you won't say that, you won't do this, you won't do that. But when you get to the political level, everyone can always back away from that and say, well, I'm representing the interests of my constituents, and this is not a bullying issue, this is just, you know, X, Y, Z. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that is.
So you think it's been a progression over time that, almost tradition through politics over a number of years, that we've just continued to degrade and degrade and degrade until
I haven't
it's...
been alive for long enough to know that, but I think that...
That's what history is about.
Well,
you
you can
have to read your history.
It's different reading it than living it, I'll tell you that much.
I imagine. And that's why I think to a degree, people should be, regardless of the color of the tribe, regardless of the banner of the tribe that you come from, people should respect politicians. I have a friend who's, because I dabbled in politics a bit, I have a friend who tells me constantly he hates all politicians. And I have a different picture of that because I've had the opportunity to sit with you. I've had the opportunity to sit with other politicians and realize that we are all just people who are having to deal with these difficult issues. And I think, and I hope people begin to understand that politicians are just people. It is up to us to come out and vote and hold people to account, but they are just people. Again, and I would say that to you with your political opponents as well.
For sure.
They're just people. And Nancy and I have had this conversation a number of times of trying to figure out how to get rid of some of the tribalism that's popular these days and figure out how we can talk. And you've very clearly said you don't think that could happen. But what do you think of a public forum where people begin to come together and where very reasonable moderators like us?
If only there was a place where people could show up and post comments anonymously to show their opinions about various topics.
Yeah.
That's a good idea. Maybe we should write that one down.
So maybe that's what's empowered it.
Social media.
That could be part of it.
Social media is I think less. It's less impacted the discourse. It's more just opened up how people are. I don't think that it's made people meaner. I think it's given mean people a voice that's louder than otherwise.
And so do you think that can't be overcome? Because you're
people
hearing from a disappointed idealist here.
Sure, yeah,
So-
I'm cynical about this, but what are you going to do? You have a group of people. In any population, you've got your meanies, right? You've got your bullies, and you've got people who are not like that as well. And you've got people in the middle. It's a spectrum. Some people are really mean. Some people are really nice. Generally, like driving around, you see people's faces like this, or you see people's faces that are a little bit happier to just be driving around. People's disposition is on a spectrum, and some people have a tendency to be loud with their opinions, and others don't want to get involved in arguments. And so that's why, at least during the last election, the noise on social media was completely different from the interactions at the doorstep and the results at the polls. Because when people actually show up and they're not there to, beat their chests and try to, show people how tough they are, when you're in that ballot booth and you're marking down your ballot in private, that's where you really get a sense of where people's priorities are at. And I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, it seems like I don't know, I get the sense that people are becoming more increasingly polarized, but from what you're saying, maybe that's not necessarily the truth, that there is that spectrum and there's a large group in the middle and we're just hearing the vocals on either side.
And
more.
I think party politics has a huge role to play there. You know, I think if you go back and reading your history, there were times where parties did not have the incredible cult-like power that they do today in our government system.
But they also didn't have media, so there was
Sure.
a complete difference
Sure.
of the way media worked.
Oh, absolutely.
And we see when we look at history, we can see as media has grown, so has what's gone at the ballot box, and now we see interference with that. That media has turned around and started to cannibalize
There you
itself,
go, and
it's now interfering back in.
Weaponization, it's that same
So
thing.
weaponization.
You've got a camera, it could be used to make a good documentary, it could also be used to
Spy on
mess with
people
people, right? So,
Yeah.
and I think overall on the respectful politics piece, as I've said, and I say this all the time, I am a cynic on it. I hope that it will get better. I do the best that I can. I listen to people with an open mind all the time, especially people that I've never heard of. Those are the most trusted sources in my book as a representative. I don't have much hope, but I'm willing to keep chipping away at it and see what happens. I think that there have been these beautiful moments on Port Moody Council where all the divisions sort of fell apart and we had conversations, and sometimes it was after strategic planning, it was after a non-structured time. I think structurally, the way that our government is set up, both on the environmental piece, on the social justice piece, on the Indigenous rights piece, on the respectful discourse piece, the fundamental structure for 200 plus years, we have been creating a system to show up, take land, grab stuff, ship it back home. And that's what's been going on since the beginning of time in North America here, as soon as the colonials showed up. And we've only been talking about the other side of it for 40 years, really?
30
20 years?
seconds, right?
30 seconds. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things that's going to take a long time to change. Politics is designed to be combative, and hopefully we can find some better systems. I think some structural change is what we need, and that's what we're hearing out in the community as well, with whether it's protests about the Black Lives Matter, whether it's looking at the Indigenous rights issues that we've been plagued with for generations. I think it's a structural issue. You can have as many good people in a system as you want, but unless you address some of those systemic problems, I think we're going to just keep seeing them bubbling up.
They're gonna continue to haunt us if we don't actually address them.
Time for
I agree.
revolution.
That's yeah. So what I would like to ask of you, Rob, at this point is what other environmental issues are going on in Port Moody right now that you might want to tell us and our audience about?
I'm glad you asked, because I brought my list. I know Nancy you were telling me that our website is pretty comprehensive with some of this stuff. I'm so proud of this council for taking the environment seriously and bringing some really significant sustainability issues forward. We declared a climate emergency, which I think is a really good step in acknowledging the sort of situation we're in. Biodiversity is down. I think it's like 50% in 40 years or something like that. And it's us, like we're the reason for that. We have the aim of 90% of residents living within easy walk. 50% of the cars driven zero emissions by 2030. Again, whatever local government can do for that. We've got the building and construction industry. That is something that local government does have quite a bit of power on. And so buildings are one of the largest contributors actually to GHG emissions that local governments can take care of. So we have a 40% reduction plan there for 2030. Policies and plans, I mean, we've got the master transportation plan, we've got our upcoming OCP that's going to be taking a look at some of these issues. And we've got a beaver management plan that came out. We've got a bear management strategy that's coming out. We have an environmentally sensitive area strategy update that's happening. We have a huge initiative with our pollinators. If you drive up Heritage Woods Secondary, up Heritage Mountain Boulevard there, you'll see some fantastic native plants that are being planted there for our pollinators. And And just, I asked a number of, I asked all of our council if there are any shout outs for our staff or any initiatives, and I've got a couple of them. One of our staff people, Laura Sampliner, was shouted out a couple times for her amazing work. We're one of the first cities in Canada to have a climate action plan, and I think that is huge for our planning. I got another shout out to Kirk. We've got a number of the Burrard Inlet Action Plan that the Tsleil-Waututh Nation is doing. That's a huge one. We've got an open water research station that's starting back up in Port Moody. That's a big one for climate research in the past. Our parks manager, Julie Pavey, Tomlinson got a shout out as well. Robbie Nall, supervisor of horticulture, for the incredible work they're doing on the pollinator project. And of course, Jeff Moy, our head engineer, got a shout out from our transportation committee chair on a lot of the accessibility issues and the pollination thing as well.
Great to hear you supporting staff and
Yeah.
giving them shout outs as
Well,
they're
they're the ones that do the
due.
hard work, you know. We can
Yes.
sit back and say we came up with rules and strategies and policies, but the men and women who work in Port Moody that deliver these projects are
Do
really,
some of the heavy lifting, so
absolutely,
it's
they
nice to
deserve
hear
all the
them
praise.
acknowledged.
Okay, so I think that's it for our time today.
Sure.
We want to take the time. I want to thank you so much for taking this time with us and helping us understand your community better, and having being as open with us as you have been, and talking about all these issues, especially especially in a time of COVID and things like that. Hopefully, we can do this again and
Absolutely.
talk about some more of this stuff, because for me, it's a little bit cathartic, and
Yeah,
I'm enjoying
there
it.
we go. Thank you guys for having me, and thanks to Tri-City Community TV. You guys deserve all the funding that you can get, and I'll put something on the agenda for you guys for sure.
And so that covers the thank you to Tri-City Community TV. And just in the end, I'd just like to say that We've Got Issues is a citizen-based forum that's dealing with issues that are of concern to all of us in the Tri-Cities. We want to come together now and again and have these open discussions so that we all understand each other. In the end here, we would like to thank again Jeff Scott and Tri-City Community Television for hosting us and helping us get this out today. And we'd like to thank Evergreen Cultural Center for having us, as well as, I think that's it. So on behalf of Nancy Furness and myself, Brad Nickason, thank you everyone for watching this program. And look for us on Facebook and get in contact with us and tell us any other issues you want us to cover. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
Tri-Cities.
you.